Ted here from Sportsman's Finest here in Austin, Texas. We're going to talk about what sets fly fishing apart from conventional fishing. Conventional fishing, we take the rod and you're actually throwing a lure. So in conventional fishing, when you go approach your target, you take the rod and you get ready and you motion forward. You just have a forward cast. You're actually throwing a weighted object, either be a lure, or if you're bait fishing, you're throwing a live minnow or a shrimp or something with a weight, with a cork. So you're actually lobbing that lure or that object and it's going toward the target and it's pulling the line along with it. Where in fly fishing, we're actually learning how to cast a fly line. And one of the other big differences in fly fishing is that in fly casting, you have a back cast and a forward cast, which is tricky for a lot of people that get into fly fishing, and it's something that can plague them. So if you're thinking about getting into fly fishing, it's really important to seek out a fly casting lesson, because a lot of people, we are so prone to throwing everything forward our life from a ball, whatever we do, everything's forward. Where in fly casting, we have a back cast and a forward cast, and it's really hard for people to kind of grasp that, because what happens is a lot of time your stroke in a casting rod or a conventional and a bait cast or a spinning rod is very different application of power. And we'll get more into that as we grow into this series talking about the cast. But the main thing is, I just want to let you know, is that in conventional fishing, that be it a bait cast or a spinning rod, you're using the rod to throw a weighted object at the target and your lure pulls the line with it. Where in fly fishing, we're using a weighted fly line with the fly rod that pulls essentially a weightless lure to your target. So now I'm going to get into the visuals of what I just explained about comparing a fly rod to a conventional rod, just so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Again, I've got a bait caster here and I've got a spinning rod here. A lot of folks, this is their primary way of fishing. I hope to inspire those folks to try this fly fishing. So we're going to talk a little bit about this to try to demystify some of this. It's kind of funny. I actually think sometimes it's harder to learn how to cast a bait caster than a fly rod. Think of how many spools of line and how many backlashes you had growing up learning how to cast a bait caster. So I think it's kind of one of those things that some fly fishermen kind of look down upon conventional fishing. I kind of laugh because I've spent time on the boat with a guy who's an avid fly fisherman. I put a spinning rod in his hand and he casts that spinning rod and the lure goes straight up in the air and lands right there, and it's kind of funny. So anyway, that's a whole nother can of worms. Again, when I talked about in conventional fishing, when you're actually throwing a weighted object or lure, that's what I mean. It could be a topwater lure, it could be bait. You know, I've got a soft plastic on this spinning rod. If you look, so again, all we have in this apparatus when it comes to conventional fishing, either monofilament or braided line now. So when you go to cast a rod, you're actually throwing this object to your target. So when you cast, this is what's propelling at your target. And where in fly fishing, you're actually casting, again, I'm going to refer to casting the fly line, but you are casting your lure or fly, as we refer to it in fly fishing. You will cast your fly to a target. If you look here, on a fly rod, first thing you'll notice is how the fly rod is configured. You'll notice that the reel's at a very different place on the rod than it is on a bait cast or a spinning reel. There's some science behind that, but we're not going to get in the weeds on that. Right now, what I want to just show you is, again, I talk about your casting a fly line. If you look at this fly rod here, you'll see this light blue line here. This is referred to as the fly line. On the fly rod, you have three different aspects of how the reel is kind of put together when it comes to kind of your delivery system of your fly. Again, in a spinning reel or bait caster, you pretty much have just a spool of monofilament or a spool of braid. On a fly reel, you actually have something that's attached to the reel called backing, and then you have the fly line, and then you have a leader. What backing is basically, if you look at this right here, I have a reel here. This red line here is actually called backing. And what this is, it fills up the spool of your reel, so it takes up some of the space on the reel, but it also serves as a backup to your fly line. Let's say you're fishing, you catch a fish and you're lucky and it takes all your fly line. And average fly line now is 100 foot, which 100 foot's a lot of line, you think, but there are species that will take you into your backing. That's kind of one of those things a lot of fly fishermen love to say, man, it take you into your backing. So you're glad you have this backing. So what this backing is, sometimes it could be a gel spun, it could be a Dacron, basically, or the Dacron's kind of like a woven polyester material. We don't need to get too far into that, but you just need to know that there's backing on there, and attached to that backing is going to be your fly line, which you're casting. So the fly line comes on a spool like this, and this gets attached to the backing, and then this is wound onto your reel. Then the one thing on the end of the system is going to be what's called the leader. And this is going to be pretty much the only part that for a conventional fisherman that might be somewhat familiar. It's made out of monofilament. So this monofilament leader, average leaders nowadays are going to be probably, I'd say 7.5 to 9, 10 foot. There are exceptions to all of those. But again, the monofilament, what that is basically there's an extruded piece of monofilament, and it's thick in the back end, and it tapers down to what's called a tippet. And we'll get into that later. But what the leader serves as is the leader, as you cast your fly line and this line is unrolling, which is called a casting loop. As this loop is rolling out, the monofilament leader unrolls and helps deliver your fly to your target. What it does is it helps spill that energy that you generate in your fly cast, so when it goes to the fish, it presents nicely. Now there's different purposes of different leaders, and again, I'm not going to go too far into that. I just want to point out that on the fly rod, just kind of showing you the different parts of the fly rod if you're not familiar with that. And again, when we're casting, this is the part what we're learning in the fly class. In a fly cast, you're essentially learning to cast the fly line. You are learning to cast your fly, but essentially your fly, if I take this, for example, this is kind of a pretty neat analogy. If I take this thing, and actually I'm going to pull something real quick from our bin over here to just show you. This would be, I grabbed something a little bit bigger. It looks kind of big, but this is a fly that would be somewhat of called a chubby Chernobyl, or it's an attractor pattern used in fishing. And if I took this right now and I just threw it at the camera, hard as I can, it's only going to go so far. So that's why when you're casting a fly line, you're attaching this fly through the leader and you're using this fly rod to essentially cast weightless objects back and forth. Some flies do have a little bit more weight to them than others, and that's to kind of adjust the sink rate on it, but we won't go again too far into that. If I take this soft plastic, I can just chuck this and it's going past the camera. So that's the big difference between a conventional rod and the fly rod, is how the lure is delivered or your fly is delivered to your target. If you guys found this video helpful, be sure to like and subscribe. Pakmule has a series of videos that are dedicated to helping people get outdoors.